Hi, I think we can get started. Before I get started, I just want to remind everyone to please mute their microphones during the presentation. And I will. Hi, everyone. So I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, How to Get a VA Internship, an Hour with the Experts. This webinar is co-sponsored by APA's Division 18, Veterans Affairs Section, and the VA Psychology Training Council. And I'm Monica Roy, the past VA Section Chair of Division 18, and I'm a psychologist at the Boston VA Healthcare System. Before we get started, I'd like to take a brief moment to mention that Division 18, Psychologists in Public Service, has been the home for VA psychologists and other public service psychologists since 1946. If you're interested in learning more about the division and the VA section, please check out our webpage, which is in the web links pod. I also want to mention that it's a real pleasure to partner again with the VA Psychology Training Council on this webinar. Over the past couple of years, we've co-sponsored webinars, this webinar, How to Get a VA Psychology Internship, as well as How to Get a VA Psychology Postdoctoral Fellow. And we have these recorded webinars from last fall online. If you check out the web links pod, you can find the link for these presentations. And one last note before I introduce our presenters, all questions can be entered into our chat box below. We'll try to respond to the questions as we go, but we'll also leave plenty of time after the presenters for questions. We really have left a majority of time so that you can ask questions and have them answered. If there are any technical difficulties, please alert me via the chat box, and I'll try to attend to it as quickly as possible. And now for our introductions. We have 5 presenters from the VA Psychology Training Council. We have Dr. Dana Holohan, who is the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the Director of Training at the Salem VA Medical Center. Dr. Jamylah Jackson, who is the co-chair of the VA Psychology Training Council's Multicultural and Diversity Committee and serves as the Director of Training at the Dallas VA Medical Center. We have Dr. Joel Schmidt, who's the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the Mental Health Training Program Manager at VA Northern California. Dr. Wayne Siegel, who is the past chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the Director of Training at the Minneapolis VA Healthcare System. And Dr. Amy Silberbogen, who is the current chair of the VA Psychology Training Council and serves as the Training Director at the VA Boston Psychology Postdoctoral Fellowship Program. And now I'm pleased to turn it over to our agenda and to Dr. Joel Smith. Thank you, Joel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being on. Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today as we talk about getting a VA internship. I want to start by talking about a couple of big picture items to think about as you're considering a VA internship. And so first of all, I kind of want to talk about the VA itself as a cultural institution. Some of this may be things you know about and other things that you may not. Obviously, the VA is a very large healthcare system, and it has a very strong mission that it follows. So there's a lot of things that happen in the VA. There's a lot of training. There's a lot of research. But the primary mission is to provide health care for America's veterans. And so it's important to know that as you consider training in the VA, that one of the things that's important to succeed here is to have an interest in veterans' perspectives and values. Now, veterans, of course, are very heterogeneous and different in many ways. But there are some common themes that are kind of helpful to think about. For most veterans, their service was a very strong defining moment in their life, and they may have some very positive and some very negative aspects to that. So that's kind of a part of the important aspect of the people that we work with. Sometimes people that haven't worked in the VA are worried about what's it going to be like, and will I be challenged by veterans if I'm not a veteran myself? And I think that, the short answer to that is that it'll be fine as long as you come in with the right attitude, and also know that training programs will help you with that. So again, some of you may be more familiar with military culture, some of you may not, but it's definitely something that the programs will help you kind of integrate into as well. So the most important thing is to show respect, interest, and willingness to learn. And I think in my own experience, a lot of times trainees are surprised how quickly they adapt to it and how meaningful they find it to be. The VA is a bureaucracy. That should surprise no one. And so one of the things that's really important coming in is to show some flexibility and some patience. And a lot of times when people come in new with fresh eyes, they see a lot of things that could be done differently. And I think it's great to bring that perspective in and to share your insights. But it's a good idea to do it with a little bit of humility, because a lot of times things actually make more sense than they may at the beginning. And so sometimes in my experience, trainees or other folks that come to the VA, kind of jump in and have a lot of ideas about change, and some of them are great, but sometimes it's useful to kind of make sure that you get the big picture and kind of get to know things a little bit more before you go too far with that. One of the other things is that here at the VA, and I would think this is true at a lot of internships, it may be more of a structured work life than you're used to. Usually in graduate school, people have managed their time between practicum, research, teaching, and other activities. And so one of the things about the VA is that there's a very structured tour of duty, and there's a need to be visible and accountable. And so those are some of the things that are important to understand about the VA, which actually, again, is true probably at a lot of other facilities as well, but can be an adjustment sometimes for new trainees. One thing to know, Americans tend to feel very strongly about health care to veterans, even though there may be a lot of controversy about military interventions or the role of government in health care. Those can be kind of controversial topics. But again, America seems to be very united in wanting to provide good health care for veterans. And so that's great for us, but also means that we have kind of high visibility. And so it kind of brings on this other importance for accountability and so forth. At the same time, things you may have heard in the news may give you certain impressions about the VA. And what I can say from experience, and I know that my other presenters have all had long careers in the VA as I have, if you put your head down and really work on the stuff that's important and that you're interested in, you'll have a satisfying experience, and you won't get too caught up in all of those kinds of other issues and, again, the kinds of things you may hear in the media. And in fact, I would say that one of the things that's really interesting about the VA is that there are a lot of psychologists who have really great leadership roles and have kind of managed some of those things in a really positive way. So I think one of the things that you can benefit from is kind of seeing what that's like on the inside and see how some really talented people kind of navigate very successfully in this environment. Again, just to restate, I think a lot of times if you haven't been in the VA and you're kind of wondering about what the culture's like, again, in my experience, a lot of trainees come in and I'm really surprised at how meaningful it is and how much they like the work and how quickly it is to integrate in. So just want to kind of emphasize that again. And along those lines, again, there's other questions about the VA and its role in healthcare and so forth. But if you look at the research, the VA actually provides superior care, or in some cases equal care, to the private sector. And so that's kind of something that we have a lot of pride in. Also, the VA just has a lot of leadership in research, in evidence-based psychotherapy rollouts, and analytics, and so forth. So there's a lot of really exciting things that are part of being in this culture that can really make it a stimulating training environment. And again, as I said, psychologists nationally have had a lot of leadership in behavioral health innovations, and so being a part of a psychology training program is a really nice way to learn about some of those exciting things that are happening in the VA that are really affecting healthcare in general, in addition to the work specifically in the VA. So again, just a few big picture things about kind of the culture, what it's like to be here. So the other thing I want to talk about briefly is differences between the VA. I know later in the presentation there'll be more things about some of the similarities. But it is important to note that each VA training program is its own separately accredited entity and has a lot of differences. So it's really important to look carefully at the materials, the brochure from each program that you're considering. And one example is there's a lot of differences in how much research opportunities you may have at different programs. And of course the rotations can be very different in different settings and so forth. So I think it's just a good idea to make sure you read the brochure carefully for each program. And even though we're going to talk about a lot of similarities, be aware that each program is different. And one of the things I would encourage you to try to not do is when you go on interviews, ask the training director about activities that they have no mention of in the brochure, because training directors are really looking for people that are going to fit well with their program. And so if you're starting asking for a lot of things that aren't there, they're going to be concerned that you may not be the right fit for the program. So I'm going to pause there and hand it off to, I believe Amy is next. But I'll be around for questions.
Thanks, Joel. Can you all hear me and see me? Great. Thanks, Joel, so much. I'm going to speak a little bit now about some of the unique benefits of VA internships. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the VA's commitment to education and training rather than billable hours. So VA has a really long history of providing education and training, and in fact trains the most psychologists in the country. Education is one of the core pillars of the VA, along with research and clinical care. Within VA, and because of our unique funding line, there can really be a focus for our trainees on education and training them and making them the best psychologists that they can be, rather than having a strong emphasis on billable hours. At many institutions, supervision is really seen, at many VA institutions, supervision is really seen as a benefit and a privilege of being a psychologist, not a collateral duty. And so I think a lot of things that trainees speak about, VA trainees speak about across the country, is really feeling valued as a trainee, and that there's a tremendous amount of effort put towards professional development within VA. I think Joel alluded to this, but another unique feature is of VA is the emphasis on evidence-based practice or measurement-based care. Science really drives care and decision-making within VA, and there are just a tremendous number of evidence-based psychotherapies within a diverse range of clinical presentations, so PTSD, substance abuse, insomnia, depression, pain, the list just goes on. And there are a lot of resources devoted towards training and certifying providers in the various EBPs in order to make them available to veterans with mental and behavioral health conditions. Most facilities, or all facilities, all have a local EBP coordinator. And many institutions, trainees benefit from this by being taught by certified providers, and oftentimes based on local availability, they may have the opportunity to take trainings themselves and get certified as providers at some point during the course of their training at VA, which really leaves our interns very marketable upon finishing internship, and quite capable of treating a diverse range of presentations. I want to speak a little bit about interprofessional training. Within each VA, there is a wide range of available clinical experiences, including inpatient and outpatient training. really touching on every diagnostic category, with many training opportunities that are co-located or embedded in primary care or medical specialty clinics. So along with this comes excellent opportunities for interprofessional training, learning from providers from different disciplines, learning with other trainees who represent different disciplines, and so really expanding out your knowledge of how to interact in a team setting, which is critically important at this point in the field. Training at VA also provides students with an opportunity to work with underserved populations. As veterans served at the VA typically do not have the economic resources as well as other resources to seek health care elsewhere. So we have the opportunity to provide care to individuals who risk their lives for our country, which I think can be incredibly powerful and meaningful work. It's a way to give back and engage in social justice or public service work, which can be just incredibly rewarding. I think that trainees often comment on the ability to really see psychologists operating in a wide range of roles within VA. So psychologists at VA often have kind of broad career trajectories and are able to engage in multiple professional capacities, including clinical work, administrative efforts, research, leadership role, supervision, consultation. So it's a really nice opportunity for trainees to see psychologists really embracing these different roles and being exposed to these different roles so they have an idea of different trajectories for themselves. While it's not a requirement to have prior training within VA in order to be selected as an intern, a postdoc, or a future employee, it certainly is beneficial to understand and be trained within VA. And so we often have interns applying who say, well, I never did a practicum, am I still competitive? The answer is yes. Same thing at the next level of postdoc and the next level at employment. And it really behooves you to understand and to get training at a VA if you're thinking about VA as kind of the pipeline with which you want to pursue your career. And lastly, my last comment about kind of some of the unique attributes of VA is that funding is stable. So all funding for internships and postdocs come from the Office of Academic Affiliations. It's written into the overall budget. It's assigned by location. And therefore, that means funding is stable from year to year with very few exceptions. This allows for consistent training, a commitment to training without a lot of turnover, which is a huge benefit for our trainees. So those are the aspects that I really wanted to highlight in terms of unique attributes of training in the VA, and I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Hello. I'm not sorry to say that you will not have the benefit of seeing video of me, but I've been asked to talk about applying to a range of programs. So, like, what are the different kind of types in terms of competitiveness of programs that people should apply to? One thing that's important to point out is that the APIC match data year in and year out kind of proves that applying to more than 15 programs doesn't improve anyone's ability to match. And I think that like 12 is kind of a good number, and it increases very slightly from 12 to 15. So you don't have to apply to like so many programs. So competitiveness. The first thing that I would say is you can set your sights very high in applying to very competitive programs, but you also want to apply to programs that maybe are not as competitive. But I think it's super important to not apply anywhere where you really wouldn't consider going, or an area of the country that you feel that you wouldn't want to live. You're wasting application fees, your time, the program's time. There can be some that you're not sure of, and you learn more through the application process. But again, only those programs that you would be interested in. People have already talked about how to learn about programs, but I would suggest talking to faculty, grads of your program, knowing where people have gone. Many doc programs keep lists of where people have gone on internship, and that can be very useful. One of the best resources for kind of finding out how competitive a program is, besides kind of reputation and talking to those individuals I noted, is going to the program's APIC listing. And about halfway through the listing, the heading is Summary of Characteristics of Internship Classes. And this is a table that for the last 3 years will tell you the number of applications that the program received. It will give you the number of slots that they have. And from that you can kind of figure out what that ratio is. And relative, if it's super high, that program would be very competitive. And if it's not a very high ratio, it probably would not be as competitive. Also paying attention to the number of people that they interview within that too can give you a sense of the competitiveness of the program. People already talked a little bit about kind of the match or the fit for the program, but that can also help you think about kind of that range of programs and which ones that you're probably going to be more competitive or less competitive for. So if your training experience doesn't fit with the type of experiences that the program has or the type of qualifications that they put in their materials or their online brochure or whatever, then you probably have a less chance of matching there. And so that program, even though it may not be super competitive, it's kind of more of a reach for you. So really kind of thinking about kind of that fit. The APIC listing also has information where the program can list preference for certain types of degrees, PhD, PsyD, APA, CPA accredited, and VA can take both of those now. Some programs will have a list of prior trainees on their brochure or website, and have they taken trainees before from your type of program? Is it frequent? Is it infrequent? Or if it's not your program, it's programs that are similar. And I know Joel had mentioned kind of paying attention to the focus on research training. If it's something you're not interested in, but the program has a lot of experiences or requires research during that, that's probably not going to be a very good fit, and you're not going to be as competitive for that. So it's good to have a range, and then strongly suggest, as you're considering, get mentorship. So talk to people that kind of know you, your training, and can help guide you through the process, because it can be unsettling and a little bit stressful. So more information would be better. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dana, I believe.
Thanks, Wayne. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. All right, well, we're going to be talking a little bit about some interview tips, and some of these are general interview tips, not necessarily specific to the VA, although I'll add in some information that may be unique to the VA. And as others have mentioned, one of the most important things in applying, but also in interviewing, is becoming very familiar with a site's published information. As Joel mentioned earlier, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA, and so just because we're at a VA doesn't mean that that describes very well what's going to occur there. And in our brochures, there's often really lovely nuggets of important information about what each site values, prioritizes, and emphasizes. And being familiar with each of these for each site can help you anticipate what kind of questions will come up and determine issues about any fit that you might want to address during the interview. So for example, if a site emphasizes a scientist practitioner model and you received an interview and you come from a program that's got less of a research basis, you can anticipate that on your interview you will likely be asked about your research background, maybe talk in detail about your research expertise or how you might apply that on the internship, or why you're interested in a scientist practitioner program in particular.
You also want to familiarize yourself with the staff and their expertise. And it's helpful in that way for thinking about what kinds of questions you might be asked, what their priorities and interests are, but also who you might want to ask questions of regarding different parts of the program. It's helpful to also try to understand the structure of the day and how to anticipate preparing for your interview. So if you have 30-minute interviews, you can anticipate that there's going to be, let's say if you have 3 of those, how many questions you're going to need to ask of different interviewers to be prepared. Will you know who the interviewer will be in advance? How you might prepare if that's the case. Most interviews include a time for you to ask questions, and it's helpful to prepare focused questions. This is very important to make sure you're not just repeating things that have already been covered, and you also want to have an opportunity to not ask questions that are already in a brochure and in published materials. But think about what kinds of questions you actually need answered in order for you to make your own ranking decisions. What information would help you in that, and who do you need to get that information from? Is that staff? What kind of staff will be able to answer the questions that you actually have? Or what questions do you have for the trainees if or when you have time to meet with them? Some typical information to also prepare is just general interview questions that are common. You obviously want to look at the list of commonly asked questions. Thinking about a clinical vignette you could share, case conceptualization you could share in a short time frame, cases that you've learned from, questions about your research. When you're asked questions, you want to take it as an opportunity to show a depth of clinical knowledge, but also your openness and non-defensiveness. You want to be honest and not oversell or undersell your own strengths. So one example I have about that is I do DBT, and oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes someone will come into an interview and tell me that they're an expert in DBT, and I'll ask a follow-up question about what that means, and it might mean that they've done one DBT-informed skills group. And to me, that might be maybe overselling their experience, and they would have done just great if they had just told me that they had done one DBT-informed skills group. That would have actually been an appropriate level of disclosure that would have been positively received. So thinking about making sure you're accurately describing the experiences that you've had, not undervaluing them, but also not overvaluing them. And then put some thought into your strengths and weaknesses. And not use this as a giveaway to use something like rapport or something like that everyone says, but this is an opportunity to show your depth of knowledge in a certain area, your own self-insight. So it's really an opportunity to shine, and you don't want to waste that when that's a common question. You also want to be prepared for questions that are more VA specific. So why do you want to work at a VA? What concerns do you have about being a VA, if any? And specifically, why that VA? So if you've applied to all VAs, each VA site wants to know why you might be a good fit for them. And then just to wrap up, there's some overall presentation tips and guidelines that are helpful to keep in mind. So although it's an interview, it is sometimes anxiety-provoking, but it's important to stay calm and actually be yourself. This is a collaborative process, and we're trying to find a best fit that's mutually a good fit for both parties. A few things to keep in mind if you're asked multiple part questions, to be sure to answer both parts of the question or several parts of the question, or ask for parts of the question to be repeated. Also, remember to dress professionally, but think about something that actually you feel comfortable and confident in. And remember that you're interviewing the site as well. This is an opportunity for you to find out more about whether this would be a good experience for you. And finally, think about looking at the current interns in the current class, whether you feel like you would fit in well there with that class. They may be a good representation of what that site values and the different kinds of applicants that tend to match at that site. All right, I'm going to wrap up. We'll have more time for questions at the end, but I'm going to turn things over to...
Okay, can you guys hear me?
All right, victory. So I'm going to talk a little bit about diversity within the VA. Historically, I think there's been a stereotype that VA patients are pretty homogenous, that if you're working in a VA, you're going to be working primarily with older male veterans. And really, that couldn't be further from the truth. The VA serves a very wide range of ages, veterans as young as in their 20s. There are lots of women veterans, and those numbers are always growing. And the veteran population is actually really diverse. So if you're looking to gain experience working with a wide variety of patients with pretty varied backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, ability, sexuality, and all kinds of other areas, the VA is a great place to train. In terms of diversity training within VA, one of the strengths of training in a very large organization, such as VA, is that your program director or training director will have the benefit of shared resources with others that are doing similar work around the country. So that shared community of resources really makes a big difference and makes programs stronger. One of VA psychology's really large priorities is addressing multicultural issues in training. And so consistent with that priority are a number of national initiatives that offer support and resources for psychology training programs within VA. So if you're interested and passionate about diversity, VAs are a great place to train. We serve a diverse population in terms of age, ethnicity, ability. There's a ton of diversity just within military culture, socioeconomic status, LGBT status, gender, rural populations. The VA has telemental health offerings which allow you to get that expertise or to develop that area of training, which can be incredibly marketable and useful depending on where you're going to be working and living. And I found that trainees are often really surprised at the breadth of training experiences and the population with which they can work within VA. Since we're a national agency, the VA has opportunities VA trainees have opportunities to interface with lots of different kinds of trainees and staff around the country. There's a national diversity listserv where trainees and staff can ask questions or share resources related to diversity topics. There are topical articles that are circulated regularly within that listserv. There are quarterly diversity consultation calls where there'll be a particular topic. Some of the topics we've done in recent months are race-based stress and trauma, experiential exercises in diversity training, religion and spirituality and mental health, and a number of other topics that can be extremely interesting and useful. And also helping training programs to work on how they do with recruiting. One of the VA's priorities is training. It's one of the VA's main priorities, one of its 4 main priorities. And so we want to train a diverse workforce. And so some of the national initiatives that have gone on have had to do with figuring out how do we recruit and retain a diverse staff and diverse trainees and all those kinds of things that are a big priority. So in terms of when you're applying to sites, thinking about how you talk about diversity. So being sure to talk about your own cultural variables and how that impacts your thinking and your work with clients to demonstrate your knowledge of your own stimulus values. Sometimes trainees will get so focused on describing the different cultural factors that are going on for the patient that they forget to talk about their own cultural variables. So being sure to highlight those things in your diversity essay or in your interviews and things like that. During interviews, being prepared to talk about cultural factors. All VAs are going to be a little bit different, as my colleagues have talked about, but for many VA interviews, you'll be asked some kind of question around diversity or cultural issues. So just kind of being thoughtful about that and being flexible in how you discuss it. So you could talk about a case where cultural variables were particularly salient or professional interactions in which cultural variables were very relevant. And again, not just about the person that you're interacting with, but also your own experience and how they impacted the interaction or diagnostic considerations and what have you. With regard to diversity in other areas, self-awareness is important. So knowing what you don't know, as well as having a plan for how you might find out whatever information might be needed or exploring biases and things like that. So trying not to put pressure on yourself to have the right answer as much as the right process in terms of being able to seek out assistance or resources or consultation, and all those kinds of things are going to be incredibly important. As my colleagues have talked about, if you've reviewed the program materials, then having a good sense of what that program offers in terms of diversity training and being able to ask questions about that, or to get clarification that helps you understand kind of what X, Y, or Z programming might look like, or what the program's expectations are of their trainees with respect to those areas, is also going to be incredibly important. And that's what I've got. I went through that pretty fast. So I'm going to turn it back over to our moderator and go from there.
Hi, this is Monica. So we have plenty of time for questions that you might have from the audience, so please feel free to put them into the chat box. I know that we already had one question about APA accreditation, so I'm not sure if everyone saw that in the chat box, but Joel, would you like to address that question just so everyone can hear the answer?
Yeah, I'm going to hop back on my webcam here. Yeah, so the question was about whether all VA internships are APA accredited, and basically most of them are. The only ones that aren't are new programs, and the Office of Academic Affiliations has a requirement that programs get accredited within 3 years. So there are some programs that are relatively new that still have not gotten accredited yet, but are working on it. And it's important to know that if you go to a not yet accredited program, you are still a VA program, I should say, you are still eligible for VA postdoc.
Great. Thank you, Joel. So, Monica, I think, is this where, can you hear me first off?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so this, I'm going to start my webcam and read through some of the questions and direct the questions to some of the different people on our panel. So the first question is, given the VA's value of diversity, is it appropriate to self-identify as a racial ethnic minority in essays and cover letters? And I would say that absolutely it is very appropriate to do that. And I don't know if, thank you for making that window larger. I don't know, Jamylah, if you had anything else to add about that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you that it's definitely appropriate. You don't feel like you necessarily have to do it, or it's going to be counted against you if you don't self-identify. You certainly don't have to, but I think that it's perfectly appropriate for folks to identify whatever their minority status might be, or whatever their background might be that's relevant to their interest in diversity and their passion and kind of their evolution in training in that area, for sure.
Thank you, Jamylah. When looking at summary of characteristics and the acceptance compared to apps ratio, what ratio or number of applications would be considered a highly competitive site? Wayne, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I don't know that I have a clear or definitive answer in terms of what the ratio is. I would say I would pay attention to the relative, look at the range of your program, what is the ratio across the different programs, and then also considering the fit with what the program is wanting and your materials. I don't know that we have any data on what that ratio really is, other than just considering the range. If other presenters have more information, I would be welcome. I would like to hear that as well.
Wayne, I was going to say the same thing, that really I don't think there is a standard, but I think that if you look at a program across a couple years and look at 3 or 4 other programs across a couple years, you'll get a sense of which programs tend to have more applications than others, and then you'll develop your own range of competitiveness within the programs that you're interested in. Okay. Okay, so this is a question about kind of those applicants who are continuing to gain training experience and clinical hours from the time with which they submit their API to when they are actually interviewing, and are various programs looking at, expected versus completed assessment hours. And I think the question could be expanded to also include therapy hours as well. My sense is that each program might look at this a little bit different, but I can speak, at least from my experience, that we're really looking for good, solid training to date, and we're really interested in the types of experiences that you're going to be having between kind of the time you submit your API and when you would interview. So if your hours are lower at the time of submission, that would certainly kind of set off not a flag, but kind of a note to read further and make sure that you're getting that well-rounded training in the interim period. Does anybody have anything to add?
This is Dana. I was just going to say that the training director has signed off on those hours that have already occurred, and sometimes people's plans change from what they're anticipating doing, and it's not been confirmed by your training director. So I would say probably a number of sites will look at what's already occurred as using that for their initial evaluation. And then in an interview, you could talk more about the extensive experiences that you've had since then.
Thank you, Dana. Jamylah, can you talk a little bit more on the quarterly diversity discussions that happen within VA?
Yeah, so those calls tend to have a predetermined topic. So some of the topics that I mentioned, we did race-based stress and trauma, and so for that one, there was probably, and for most of them, there's a 20 to 30 minute presentation that someone gives on a particular topic. It might be looking at research in that area or looking at clinical interventions in that area. For race-based stress and trauma, we were talking about some race-based stress and trauma groups that are being done, I think, at the Chicago VA for veterans that have experienced trauma related to racism within their military groups, and the kinds of stressors that you might not expect necessarily when you're thinking about military veterans. You're thinking about combat and things like that, but there are lots of things that happen within different units that are extremely traumatic for folks. So talking about some interventions that particular VA was doing and looking at some of their outcome data. And then the second 20 to 30-ish minutes is spent in a general discussion of other folks that may have implemented similar things, or questions that people have about strategies for trying something like that at their site if that's something that they're interested in, and things like that. So that's kind of the general kind of rubric or approach that goes into those consultation calls, and that's the same regardless of the topic. So we actually have a call today that's focused on addressing diversity training resources and initiatives for APA accreditation. And so similarly, the first 20 to 30 minutes will be spent on some different ideas of things that programs can do that can help them to meet the APA accreditation requirements. And then the second part will be general discussion about things that people have tried that maybe weren't mentioned within the presentation, or things that people are thinking about, or barriers that people have encountered, and things like that.
Thank you. Are individuals who do not complete a VA internship less competitive for postdoctoral fellowship considerations? Wayne, as the chair of the APIC postdoc committee, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. It would depend upon the program, but I would say that if you did an internship where you had strong training and skills that were consistent with that postdoctoral program that you're applying to, it wouldn't necessarily make you less competitive. But if you were at a site that was very different than the VA that you were applying to, I think that it would hurt your chances. So it's really not necessarily about the site, but about the activities, skills, things that you were trained in that make you competitive for that particular site. Some people look for VA, but they also look for exceptions to that as long as the training experience is consistent and of quality too.
Thank you. Are there opportunities for clinical work with family members of veterans as well? So I think that if you're really interested in working with family members, I think that's definitely an opportunity at all sites in all ways, and I think it's more emphasized in some programs where they have maybe more established couples-based clinics or family-based clinics. And so that would be certainly described in the brochure, but all care can be provided to significant others, family members, to the extent that it also benefits the veterans' well-being. But there are some programs that may have direct training experiences, particularly focused on supporting family and or relationships. Anybody have anything to add? If not, we'll go to the next question. Looks like someone was asking about submitting a psychological report and what type of report should be submitted. I think I can answer that, but if others want to jump in, my thought would be really you want to match your report to the type of clinical service that you're applying to and what you're interested in doing. So if you're in neuropsychology, you probably want to submit a report that reflects, if that's a required part of the application, that's not a standard part of the API, but some programs request additional information. You really want to just match kind of the type of report you're submitting to the clinical service or setting that you're submitting to. If we have VA training experience and are applying to VA and non-VA sites, how do we balance these discussions of experience with veterans and interest in this population in essays, cover letters? Should we have one version of essays for VA sites and a second version of essays for non-VA sites, or instead have one set of essays and focus on these interests and cover letters? Does somebody else want to take that call?
Amy, this is Joel. I can take it.
That question?
So, first of all, I think the idea of writing multiple essays is quite daunting when you consider how long the API is anyway. So, I think probably one essay is generally good. But the question about the cover letter is really important, and this is my advice. The cover letter is the one thing that's going to be unique for each of your applications. So don't shortchange that. I think one of the things I've seen sometimes in applications is if it feels a little bit too generic and not related to the specific program, training directors will probably notice that. So I would say put your energy into a really good cover letter that is very specific to the sites that you are applying to. And so it should definitely be different for each of the sites.
Thank you, Joel. We have a follow-up question about submitting psychological reports and what's the most useful report to submit, or type of report to submit. Does anybody have anything else to add to that? Dana, I'm not sure if that's something
I just second about making sure that it's appropriate to the site that you're submitting it to. If you're applying for a neuropsych, you would want a neuropsych report, for example, or if a site that has a strong cognitive behavioral emphasis, you probably might want less of things that don't fit with that site. So I would try to make sure it's a good fit.
The only thing I would add, this is Jamylah, is to ensure that your report is an adult report. Sometimes we'll get applications and it's an assessment report that's a child sample, and so that's harder to gauge with respect to our population because we don't see children within VA. So I would say one of the things, like Dr. Holohan is saying, in terms of making sure it's applicable to the site, is ensuring that if you're applying to an adult site that you're submitting a report that's consistent with that.
This is Wayne. The one thing that I would add is please, please, please make sure that report is de-identified according to HIPAA standards. People slip up on that all the time. It will probably exclude you from that site, and then the training director has to figure out how to get to notify the appropriate individuals that privacy was breached. So please, please triple check that and have your supervisor review it, whoever supervised that report.
Great point, Wayne. Thank you. Looks like we have a few other people typing questions to come in.
Maybe there's a question about research I could take. Do you want me to grab that one?
We have about 8 minutes.
Okay, there was a question about research opportunities at VAs and which sites stand out as prioritizing research and what you can do to signal competitiveness. I think all of us would emphasize that both in the APIC search as well as in our brochures, whether research opportunities are available as a minor rotation, for example, at some sites or sometimes as required. So it should be pretty clear based on the brochure and the materials whether that's something that's available at that VA, and also what kind of content is covered. So like, for example, at our VA, there's 3 or 4 opportunities for minors in different content areas. And it's very helpful for us to make sure that cover letter, as Joel was mentioning, is very clear in this regard. This is an opportunity for you to say your interest in that area and how they might overlap. Similarly, as Joel mentioned about not shortchanging the cover letter, the research essay is very important as well, and making sure that you're elaborating on what your research experience is, and potentially if that's something you want to continue on, you can make that connection to the VA in which you're applying.
Great. We have a question about applying to VA neuropsychology track positions and whether individuals interested in the neuropsych route should submit more than 12 to 15 applications. My thought about this one, and then I'll turn it to anybody else who has additional thoughts, is that really anytime you narrow kind of your field, whether it's because of geography and you're only applying to a certain area of the country, or you definitely want a particular type of experience, it may behoove you to increase kind of the bandwidth of applications you submit, because you're already restricting in some ways. I don't know if there's a magic number, Wayne, for neuropsych. I don't know if we have any data on that in particular.
This is Wayne. I'm not sure that there is any data to suggest that that magic number of 15, more than that, adding no benefit, is different for neurotrack positions or not. It would take me a little while. The match data is up on the APIC website, and you could go there and look specifically. I'll look later today when I have some free time, and if someone wants to email me, that's fine, but I think that you can look yourself too. I'm not sure that it's available, though, to break that down. But again, also, I would pay attention to the competitiveness of those programs and what are the experiences that they're wanting for you to be competitive for that neuropsych track.
Thank you. There's a question about the autobiographical essay and whether that should focus more on the individual as a person or as a professional, and what people like to read. My guess is there's a lot of variability in reviewers and what they're interested in. I would really encourage you to be true to yourself and kind of how you feel you want to present. I think that some of the most engaging essays are ones in which someone's able to intertwine kind of both who they are as a person with their aspirations for their career, and certainly look very highly on those letters that are very like, here's what I've done, and here's kind of what I want to do. Those are really engaging, as well as some people really engage in a lot of creative writing as long as it's appropriate, not overly disclosing, then I think those are okay as well.
I'm just going to add that the making sure that you're taking advantage of that essay one, you do have a cover letter, which is purely professional, really, and then you have an opportunity to describe all of your interests and how they fit. So if you just duplicate that in essay one, you've really missed an opportunity to show who you are. I do agree about making sure there's appropriate self-disclosure, and you definitely want it to be professionally written, but you don't want it to sound similar to your cover letter.
This is Joel. If I could just add one thing to that, I think this is a tough essay for some people for this exact question about how much should I disclose and how much is too much. One bit of advice I would have is try to give yourself enough time so that you have somebody that can review it for you. I think, particularly your advisor or somebody like that. I think your best bet is if you can get someone to give you some feedback to kind of help you hit that right sweet spot, as everyone has described, where you're letting the reader know who you are, but not kind of going beyond what would be kind of a good level of disclosure. So again, it's just a hard thing to hit, and so the best bet is to get someone to read it for you and get their opinion about it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Joel. Using your mentors from graduate school can be really critical, because they're evaluating applications every year as well for their graduate program. So we just have 2 minutes left. Let me just take 1 or 2 more questions. Is neuropsych assessment part of all geropsych rotations across all VAs? I'm not sure I can answer that. I am hearing from some of my cohort that the answer is no, that there are some gero rotations that do not include neuropsych assessment. So I think that would be really important. You can kind of search on the APIC directory online and then go to the brochures for those training programs that have experiences in gero to see what types of experience those are.
Sure.
Monica, I'm noticing the time. Do we want to wrap up?
My camera on here? Sure. We can wrap up. If there are any outstanding questions that we have not had a chance to answer, please feel free to send them to Amy Silberbogen. Amy, do you mind putting your email in the chat box for everyone? And Amy will make sure that the appropriate people receive the questions to be able to respond. And I just want to remind everyone that we have recorded this session, and so if you have any friends who weren't able to attend and can't attend the one on Thursday at 2 o'clock, please let them know that they can access the recorded session in about a week at the website or that's listed in the web links pod. Also, if there's any questions about the recording, please feel free to email me I will put my address here at monica.roy@va.gov, and I'm happy to send information about where you can locate the recording. I want to truly thank our presenters today from the VA Psychology Training Council. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully this was helpful for you for your internship application process, and we wish you all well. Thank you.